If you ever find yourself standing in the center of St. Jude's, look up at the skyscrapers and listen. You'll hear the city breathing, but you won't hear yourself. That's how it starts. Sarah and I weren't looking for a scare. We were just looking for a shortcut. It was a humid Tuesday evening in the city, the kind where the air feels like a damp wool blanket. We had tickets for a 9 p.m. movie, and the sidewalk traffic on Fifth Avenue was a nightmare of slow-moving tourists and construction barriers. Through the cemetery, I suggested, pointing at the rusted iron gates of the old Episcopal graveyard. It cuts right through to the theater district. We'll save 15 minutes. Sarah hesitated, her eyes tracing the jagged line of the stone wall. On the other side of that wall, the city was alive. Yellow taxis honked, neon signs for cheap sushi flickered, and thousands of people were rushing toward their next meal. Inside the gates, however, the grass was a bruised shade of purple in the twilight. It's a graveyard, Mark. It's disrespectful. It's a park with permanent residents, I joked, pulling her hand. Come on, the sun isn't even fully down. We stepped through the pedestrian entrance. The transition was instant. It wasn't that the noise stopped, it was that the noise changed. The roar of the city became a muffled hum, like we had suddenly put on a pair of heavy earmuffs. We followed the paved path, our sneakers clicking against the slate. The skyscrapers hemmed us in on all sides. To our left, a luxury apartment complex rose 40 stories high. I could see people in their kitchens, the blue light of televisions flickering in floor-to-ceiling windows. They were so close, I could almost see what they were eating for dinner. It felt safe. How could anything go wrong when 1,000 witnesses were staring down from their balconies? But as we reached the center of the grounds, the air grew heavy. That's the only way to describe it. It felt like the atmospheric pressure had tripled. Each breath required a conscious effort, pulling thick, cold air into my lungs. Mark, let's just go back. Her voice sounded tiny, stripped of its echo. The north gate is right there, I said, pointing toward a silhouette of wrought iron. 5 more minutes. We hurried toward the gate, but the path seemed to stretch. The faster we walked, the more the distance between us and the exit stayed the same. I looked up at the apartment buildings again. They were still there, glowing and vibrant, but they felt a million miles away. It was a cruel trick of the light. I could see a woman on the 12th floor watering a plant, completely oblivious to us, while we were drowning in a sea of silent stone. We reached the north gate, breathless. I grabbed the handle. It didn't budge. A heavy chain, cold as ice, was wrapped 3 times around the bars. It's locked, I hissed. They aren't supposed to lock this until 10. The other way, Sarah urged, her grip on my arm tightening until it hurt. Go back to the entrance. We turned around and ran. But the path we had just walked wasn't there. Instead of the straight slate walkway, 3 narrow dirt trails branched out between rows of crumbling Victorian monuments. The city lights were still visible above the tree line, but the ground level was descending. We were walking down into a hollow we hadn't noticed before. The silence became absolute. The city hum was gone. No sirens, no engines, no laughter. Just the sound of our own frantic heartbeats. The temperature plummeted. I could see my breath blooming in the air like a ghost. Look, Sarah pointed. A few yards away, a man was standing by a tall, headless angel statue. He was wearing a modern suit, looking just like any other businessman we might have passed on the street. He was staring up at the skyscrapers with an expression of pure, agonizing longing. "Excuse me?" I called out. "Is there another way out?" The man didn't turn. He didn't blink. He just kept staring at the glowing windows of the apartments, his hands clawing at the air as if trying to grab a handful of the light. As we backed away, I realized his shoes weren't touching the grass. He was hovering an inch above the dirt, vibrating with a silent, frantic energy. We bolted into the dark, tripping over hidden roots and sunken graves. We weren't in the city anymore. We were in the dead space between the living worlds, a pocket of reality that the GPS couldn't find. Finally, we saw the glint of the main entrance. We scrambled over the wall, scraping our palms on the jagged stones, and tumbled onto the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. The noise hit me like a physical blow, the beautiful, chaotic roar of the city. I looked back through the bars. The cemetery was small. barely a city block. I could see the north gate from where I stood. It was wide open. There was no man, no fog, no heavy air. Sarah and I didn't go to the movie. We went home and turned on every light in the apartment. But sometimes when it's late and the city gets quiet, I look out my window at the dark patch of the graveyard. I know that somewhere in there, the path is still stretching, and the air is waiting to turn heavy again. Because I know you're waiting for the next scenario, let's dive into the third one. This is the one that makes you check your reflection twice and look at your photos a little closer before posting them. The camera never lies, but sometimes I wish it would. My girlfriend, Lena, is an aspiring influencer, which means our dates usually involve me playing the role of Instagram husband. When she suggested we do a sunset photo shoot at the old Metropolitan Cemetery, I didn't protest. The place was a Gothic dream, rows of weeping willows, weathered Celtic crosses, and the massive, jagged silhouette of the city's financial district looming over the stone walls like a pack of glass wolves. "The lighting is perfect, Jax," she said, spinning in her white sundress. "It's that eternal aesthetic." The cemetery was busy near the front gates, joggers from the nearby lofts and couples taking walks. But Lena wanted the authentic vibe, so we hiked back to the east wing. This section was a jungle of marble. The city noise was just a low, vibrating hum beneath our feet, muffled by the dense canopy of oak trees. I held up her professional DSLR. "All right, lean against that monument, the one with the veiled lady." Lena posed, her back to a life-size statue of a mourning woman. I looked through the viewfinder. The framing was beautiful. The sun was a dying ember behind the skyscrapers, casting long, distorted shadows across the graves. I snapped a burst of photos. Click, click, click. "Let me see," Lena said, trotting over. I scrolled back through the images. In the first photo, Lena looked radiant. In the second, her smile was the same, but I noticed something in the background. About 20 yards behind her, standing between two crooked headstones, was a man. He was tall, wearing a heavy wool overcoat that looked far too warm for a humid July evening. "A photo bomber," Lena groaned. "Is he gone?" I looked up from the camera. The space between the headstones was empty. I scanned the entire row. There was nowhere for a man in a heavy coat to hide in 3 seconds. The grass was flat, and the nearest mausoleum was 50 yards away. "He must have stepped behind a tree," I muttered, feeling a slight chill despite the heat. "Let's try again." We moved to a different spot, an ornate iron gate that led to a sunken garden of graves. Lena sat on the stone steps. I checked the perimeter. Nobody. Just us and the quiet weight of the city's ancestors. I took another shot. When the image appeared on the LCD screen, my blood turned to ice. The man in the overcoat was there again. He wasn't 20 yards away anymore. He was 10 yards away, standing right at the edge of the sunken garden. His face was blurred, not because of motion, but as if the camera simply couldn't focus on his features. He was looking directly at Lena's back. "Jax, you look pale," Lena said, stepping toward me. "What's wrong?" "Don't move." I didn't look up from the screen. I took another photo, my finger trembling on the shutter. Click. In the new photo, the man was standing on the steps right behind her. His hand, pale, gray, and elongated, was inches from her hair. I looked up frantically. The steps were empty. There was nothing but the gray stone and the flickering shadows of the leaves. I looked back at the screen. The man was there. I took another. Click. He was leaning over her shoulder now, his blurred face pressed against her neck as if smelling her. "We're leaving." Now I grabbed Lena's hand and started pulling her toward the exit. "What is wrong with you? You're hurting my arm." I didn't answer. I kept the camera on, the screen glowing in the gathering dark. Every few feet, I would aim it behind us and press the button. Each time, the man was closer. In the last photo I took before we reached the crowded main path, he wasn't behind us anymore. He was standing right next to me, his hand reaching for the camera lens. We burst through the main gates and into the neon glare of the city. The sound of traffic and shouting street vendors felt like a warm embrace. We didn't stop until we were inside a brightly lit coffee shop surrounded by people. "Show me," Lena demanded, her voice shaking. I turned on the camera and scrolled to the last photo. Lena screamed. In the picture, the man's face was finally in focus. He didn't have eyes, just smooth, indented skin where the sockets should be. But that wasn't the horrifying part. The horrifying part was that he was wearing a very familiar silver watch on his gray wrist. It was the same watch I was wearing, the one my grandfather had been buried with before the city moved his grave to make room for the subway line. I looked down at my own wrist. The watch was gone. I looked back at the photo, and the man in the overcoat was no longer looking at the lens. He was looking through the screen, directly at me, and his blurred mouth was slowly curving into a smile. The camera never lies, they say, but they never tell you what to do when the camera sees something that isn't there. My girlfriend Lena is an aspiring photographer. She has this obsession with the quiet corners of the city, those strange, silent pockets where the modern world of glass and steel grinds to a halt against the mossy stones of the past. That's how we ended up at Blackfriars Cemetery on a humid Saturday evening. Blackfriars is a cramped vertical graveyard squeezed between a massive shopping mall and a noisy elevated train line. It is a dense forest of granite and marble, packed so tightly with the city's ancestors that the headstones seem to be jostling each other for room. Above us, the skyscrapers glowed with thousands of lights, but down on the grass, the air felt thick and stale, like it had been trapped there for a century. The contrast is perfect, Lena, adjusting the lens on her high-end digital camera. Look at how the neon from the billboard reflects off that weeping angel statue. It's haunting. I stood beside her, checking the time on my phone. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the city's artificial glow was taking over. The roar of the subway trains passing overhead every few minutes made the ground vibrate, but in the intervals between trains, the cemetery became unnervingly still. It was that specific city silence, the kind that feels like someone is holding their breath. Let's get a selfie before we lose the light. Ready? 1, 2. Lena stopped. She didn't press the shutter. Her eyes weren't on me. They were locked on the digital display. Jax, move your head a little, she muttered, her voice trembling just a fraction. What is it? I asked, looking at the screen over her shoulder. At first, I saw nothing but us. Then, I saw the figure. About 20 feet behind us, standing near a crooked Celtic cross, was a woman. She was wearing a heavy dark coat that looked completely out of place for the summer heat. Her head was bowed, her long, tangled hair obscuring her face. I immediately looked over my shoulder, squinting into the darkness of the graveyard. There was no one. The path behind us was empty. The Celtic cross stood alone, surrounded by nothing but tall, dry grass. There's nobody there, Lena, I said, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. It's just a trick of the light. Look at the screen again, I looked. On the digital display, the woman was no longer 20 feet away. She was 15 feet away. She was walking toward us with a strange, hitching gait, her boots making no sound on the gravel that I could hear with my ears, yet I could see the digital grass bending beneath her weight on the screen. I whipped my head around again. Nothing. The physical space was vacant. The air was cold, but the sight remained empty. My eyes were telling me we were alone, but the camera, the mechanical eye, was insisting we were being hunted. We need to go, I said, grabbing Lena's arm. Wait, she gasped, her finger accidentally clicking the shutter. The flash went off, a blinding white strobe in the darkness. On the screen, the image processed for a split second. When it appeared, the woman was 10 feet away. She had lifted her head. Her face wasn't a face at all. It was a blurred smear of gray skin and two dark, hollow pits where eyes should be. Every time the digital sensor refreshed, she moved. It wasn't a smooth walk. It was like a stop-motion film. In the real world, I saw only the flickering neon of the city billboards. On the screen, the woman was now 5 feet away. She was reaching out a hand, a long, skeletal hand with dirt-caked fingernails. "Run!" I yelled. We bolted toward the main gates, our feet pounding against the slate path. The elevated train roared overhead, a deafening mechanical scream that seemed to mock our terror. I kept my eyes on the exit, but Lena, driven by a panicked instinct, kept the camera turned backward, glancing at the screen as she ran. "She's gaining!" Lena shrieked. "Jax, she's right behind you." I didn't look back with my eyes. I couldn't. I reached for the heavy iron handle of the cemetery gate and flung it open, dragging Lena out onto the crowded city sidewalk. We collapsed against a bus stop, surrounded by teenagers with shopping bags and businessmen on their phones. The noise of the city, the beautiful, chaotic, living noise, washed over us. We were safe. The dead space was behind the bars. Lena was shaking uncontrollably. She held up the camera one last time and looked at the final photo she had taken as we crossed the threshold. In the picture, I was halfway through the gate. Behind me, the woman in the dark coat was so close her face filled half the frame. But she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking directly into the camera lens, her blurred, lipless mouth pulled back in a grin, and on the sleeve of her coat, clearly visible in the digital light, was a small, silver brooch. The exact same brooch Lena had been wearing when we entered the cemetery, which was now missing from her dress. I looked at the gate. The cemetery was empty. But when I looked at the reflection of the graveyard in the glass of the bus stop, I saw a single, dark shape standing just behind the bars, waiting for us to look through a lens again. The most dangerous thing about the city isn't the dark alleys or the crowded subways. It's the way the map changes when the sun stops touching the pavement. "We parked by the angel with the broken wing," my father said, his voice echoing against the cold marble of the Greenwood necropolis. "5 more minutes and we'll be at the car. Trust me." Greenwood was an architectural marvel, or so the brochures said. It was a massive, perfectly symmetrical grid of graves tucked right into the heart of the city. To our left, a luxury high-rise soared into the clouds, its windows beginning to glow with the orange warmth of dinner time. We could hear the muffled roar of the expressway just over the wall, the sound of thousands of people rushing home to their families. But inside the gates, the air was different. It was stagnant. It felt like breathing through a layer of old dust. I walked between my parents, holding my little sister's hand. We had come to leave flowers for my grandfather, a simple task that should have taken 20 minutes. But the sun was dropping fast, sinking behind the jagged skyline of the city, and the shadows of the headstones were stretching out like long, thin fingers. "We passed that weeping willow already," I muttered, pointing to a tree whose branches draped over a row of identical gray markers. "No, that was a different one," Dad insisted, though I noticed him walking a little faster. "The whole place is designed this way to save space. It had a grid, Ben. You can't get lost in a grid." We turned right at a large, ornate mausoleum. 5 minutes later, we turned right again, expecting to see the main gate and the glow of the streetlights on the avenue. Instead, we found the weeping willow. It was the same tree. I knew it because of the rusted iron flower holder leaning against its trunk at a 45-degree angle. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. "Dad," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "we're walking in circles." "The path must have curved," he replied, but his eyes were darting around, searching the horizon. The city was right there. I could see the flashing red light of a radio tower. I could see the silhouette of a crane on a construction site. We were in the middle of a metropolis of 8 million people. Yet the silence inside the cemetery was becoming absolute. The sound of the traffic was fading, not because the cars had stopped, but as if the air itself was refusing to carry the noise to us. We decided to head straight toward the tallest building we could see, ignoring the paved paths. We cut across the grass, weaving between the stones. Miller, Higgins, Smith, Miller, Higgins, Smith. The names began to repeat. I stopped, pulling my sister to a halt. "Look at the dates," I whispered. Every headstone in this row had the same death date, October 14th. Today's date. "Don't look at the stones, Ben," my mother said, her voice high and tight. "Just look at the gate. Where is the gate?" We looked toward the perimeter. The high-rise apartments that had been looming over us moments ago now looked tiny, like toys on a distant shelf. The cemetery was expanding. The grid was stretching. The rows of graves were multiplying while we watched, new stones seemingly rising from the turf like teeth breaking through gums. "There!" my sister cried, pointing to the statue of the angel with the broken wing. "The car is right behind it." We ran. We didn't care about being respectful anymore. We sprinted over the dead, our feet thumping on the hollow-sounding earth. We reached the statue, gasping for air, our lungs burning in the sudden, unnatural cold. But there was no car. Behind the statue was another row of headstones, and behind that, another weeping willow, and behind that, another angel with a broken wing. The landmarks weren't disappearing, they were duplicating. The cemetery was becoming a hall of mirrors made of granite and soil. A loud metallic clack echoed through the air, the sound of the main gate being locked. "The sun is gone, my mother." The city lights were still there, sparkling in the distance, but they looked like stars, billions of miles away, cold and indifferent. We were trapped in the liminal space, the in-between that the city planners forgot to map. I looked down at the ground. The shadow of the angel statue was no longer moving with the light. It was crawling toward my feet, independent of the moon. "We just have to keep walking," Dad said, though his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "It's just a grid. It has to end somewhere." But as we stepped into the next row, I looked back. The path we had just walked was gone. There was only a wall of fog and an endless, repeating line of gray stones, waiting for us to find a place where we finally fit in. The city never sleeps, they say, but they forget to mention that the things buried beneath it don't sleep either. Mark and I liked the old cathedral cemetery because it was the only place in downtown where you could hear your own thoughts. It was a 5-acre plot of crumbling Victorian graves, sandwiched between a massive subway interchange and a skyscraper that was still under construction. It was an island of gray in a sea of neon. "Do you feel that?" Mark asked, leaning back on a heavy stone bench dedicated to a family that had died out in the 1890s. "The subway?" I asked. The ground gave a familiar rhythmic shudder. It was the 6 express train, a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the soles of my sneakers and up into my teeth. It was the heartbeat of the city. We sat there for a moment, watching the sunset bleed orange and purple over the glass towers of the financial district. But when the vibration of the train faded, something else remained. Tap, tap, tap. It was a sharp, metallic sound, coming from directly beneath our bench. It sounded like someone was hitting a pipe with a hammer. "Probably a steam line," I said, though I felt a strange prickle of heat at the back of my neck. "Or maybe the construction crew next door is working late." I stood up to stretch my legs, walking a few paces toward a moss-covered headstone. As I took 3 steps, the sound followed. Tap, tap, tap. I stopped. The tapping stopped instantly. Mark frowned, standing up to join me. He took 5 quick steps toward the center of the path. Tap, 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 tap. It was perfectly synchronized. Every time his heel hit the gravel, a corresponding knock echoed from the earth beneath him. It wasn't the distant, muffled thud of a subway. It was close. It was right under the soles of his shoes, separated only by a few feet of dirt and whatever lay hidden in the dark. "It's just an echo," Mark whispered, though he looked pale. "The sound is bouncing off the mausoleum walls." "Let's test the echo," I said. My heart was beginning to hammer against my ribs. I took 1 slow, deliberate step. Tap. I waited 10 seconds. The cemetery was silent. Then I took 2 very fast hops. Tap, tap. The response was immediate. It wasn't an echo. An echo doesn't have a reflex. An echo doesn't wait for you. Whatever was down there was listening. It was mimicking us. "There are utility tunnels all over this city," Mark said, his voice shaking. "Maybe a worker is stuck, or maybe it's a prank." He knelt on the grass and pressed his ear to the soil. I watched his face change from confusion to absolute horror. He scrambled backward, nearly tripping over a flower urn. "What?" I hissed. "Mark, what did you hear?" "It's not a pipe," he breathed. "It's fingernails. Someone is scratching on the underside of a stone." I looked down. We were standing in the middle of a stacked cemetery, a common feature in old cities where, due to lack of space, bodies were buried in layers, sometimes 3 or 4 deep. Beneath the modern utility lines and the subway tunnels were the forgotten layers of the 18th century. Suddenly, the tapping changed. It was no longer mimicking us. It began a frantic, rhythmic pounding. Thud, thud, thud. The ground beneath the bench began to heave. It wasn't the vibration of a train. It was a localized, violent, upward pressure. A crack appeared in the dirt, snaking its way toward my feet. From the crack, a smell drifted up. Not the smell of a sewer, but the smell of ancient dry rot and something sweet like dying lilies. "Run," I whispered. We bolted toward the gate. As we ran, the tapping turned into a chase. Beneath the ground, we could hear the sound of something moving through the earth with terrifying speed, keeping pace with our panicked strides. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded like dozens of hands were striking the underside of the earth's crust, following our heat, our noise, our life. The city's infrastructure, the humming cables, the water mains, the subway tracks, seemed to be vibrating in sympathy with the unrest below. For a second, the blurring of the two worlds was complete. I couldn't tell if I was hearing a malfunctioning machine or a chorus of the damned. We reached the iron gates just as the streetlights hummed to life. We spilled out onto the sidewalk, nearly colliding with a businessman holding a briefcase. "Hey, watch it," the man grumbled, not even looking at the cemetery. I turned around, clutching the bars of the gate. The cemetery was silent again. The grass was still. The graves were just stones. But then, I looked down at the concrete sidewalk, just outside the cemetery wall. Tap! A single sharp knock came from directly beneath my feet, right there on the modern public sidewalk. I looked at the man with the briefcase. He didn't notice. He kept walking. And as he moved away, I heard the tapping follow him, moving out from under the cemetery and into the city streets, hidden beneath the noise of the traffic, waiting for him to finally sit down. For more stories like this, share and subscribe Goofy Horror.